Okay, Orly, shall we get started?
Yeah, it is 1:02. I say go ahead and get started, and I'll turn off the background screen.
Great. Welcome, everybody. We're really excited to do this webinar today. We have over 1,200 people signed up. This is going to be a really fun session. I'm Randy Batat, co-founder and CEO of Prevail, and we're gathered here today on an important milestone for the CMMC program. It's entered the penultimate stage of rulemaking, which is the comment period, after which the DoD will respond to the comments and it will become a final rule. The purpose of today's webinar is to answer the key questions top of mind for all of you, which include, is CMMC happening and what's the timeline? Can I wait to be compliant? And what does the rule require of contractors that handle CUI? And we have two of the most authoritative sources here to answer those questions, two people who are close friends of our company, I'm proud to say. Katie Arrington was the Chief Information Security Officer for Acquisition at the U.S. Department of Defense. She is the force of nature who created the CMMC program, as well as other key DFARS requirements in your contracts, such as the SPRS score. Believe me, if it were not for her, these important programs would not be in place at this time. CMMC will touch hundreds of thousands of companies, and it includes a fight that few people really even understood better than Katie. So nobody is better positioned than Katie to help us understand where CMMC is going, because she understands better than anyone else where it came from. CMMC and DFARS are federal regulations, and we have one of the very best lawyers to help us understand them. Bob Metzger is a partner at Rogers, Joseph O'Donnell, and the co-chair of the firm's Cybersecurity and Privacy Practice Group. The fact that he was picked by Microsoft to be their attorney of record in the complex $10 billion Department of Defense JEDI Cloud Services contract speaks to his credentials. So welcome both to Katie and Bob. And two additional points before I turn it over to them to get started. We have over, as I said, over 1,200 people registered for the session today. Many of you will have questions that aren't covered or want to understand more details about next steps. So we will look at audience questions as they come up, and I'll feed some of those as we can to Katie and Bob. But we also have, after this, breakout room set up, staffed with certified CMMC professionals to engage with you one-on-one after the main webinar, if that's what you'd like to do. To begin, I'll ask Bob first and then Katie second to just offer some opening comments on CMMC, where we are and what contractors really need to be paying attention to. Bob, do you want to give it a start?
Yeah, sure. So first, thanks again for hosting another terrific program. It's my privilege to participate. It's especially a privilege to be again sharing the virtual podium with Katie. We did that quite a bit during her tenure at DoD. Katie is the catalyst that has made all this happen. It's an exceptional accomplishment for which she deserves enormous credit, that she could mobilize such a behemoth as the Department of Defense to bring this program to the point that it was when she departed DoD, and to where it is now ultimately, because the proposed rule obviously would not exist and could not be expected to be effective, without Katie's tireless efforts in public and in private to make sure that the DIB was better protected against a range of threats. Thank you, Katie. Now, is this going to happen? Well, yeah. I mean, we have an 81-page proposed rule in the Federal Register that took a couple of years to prepare. A huge amount of effort went into basically considering hundreds of comments that were made to the the interim final rule a couple of years ago. And then a huge amount of effort went into kind of convincing OMB and other federal agencies that DoD had very good reason to do this. And so DoD has basically said to everyone, to put it very simply, we have been telling you since the announcement of the so-called 2.0 version of CMMC in November of 2021, that we're going to come out with a rule that enforces your existing obligations under the 7012 clause by subjecting you to a certification assessment in many cases. And that's what this does. I mean, for all of the words in the rule, and for some of its complexities and sources of confusion and frustration. It basically is the rule that everybody should have expected who has been paying some attention to this for a couple of years. It is not a great departure, in fact, from what DoD has been requiring companies to do by contract since December 31st, 2017. The underlying obligation is that set forth in the DFAR 7012 clause. It says you have to provide adequate security, implementing the 110 controls in NIST Special Publication 800-171. That's the core of it. That's still here. What's been added is the requirement for a certification assessment as a condition to contract eligibility once the rule is final and effective. And this is not surprising for those who have actually believed that on occasion the government will in fact do what it said it intended to do. So here we are.
All right. So
Thanks,
I'll
Bob.
take.
Yeah, Katie, please go ahead, Katie. Yeah, thanks.
So first of all, so excited to be here, but and I would be remiss of saying I thank you for the accolades, but I give all the props to the community. Stacy Bosjenik, Buddy Dees, Diane, the team working inside the DoD, all the way down to everybody on this call. You guys are the impetus of why this has actually got movement. I'm just a really loud talker. And a foot stomper. I'm a pit bull, but it's, you know, as Bob was saying, this has been, and when I came into the Pentagon, I mean, everybody's heard the story. When I got there, they're like, get everybody compliant. And you all, you know, those of us who remember, and Randy and Bob was at the very first meeting where we said, listen, if you can tell me a better way to make sure everybody's compliant, I'll go. Give me an idea. There were crickets, right? Crickets. So this was the only way that we could see fit. And it's the same basis as an ISO certification. It's the same basis for many other certs that you need to do if you're doing welding, et cetera. So getting cyber compliant is critical. Now, is the CMMC happening? Yes. And the timing is so perfectly aligned. I know that prior to getting on this call, we were talking about the hearing yesterday, the China Select Hearing Committee, about what the CCP is doing currently in our networks. Then this morning, I was reading the news, and I love reading, getting on in the morning and looking. We have HP that got hit. Johnson Controls got hit with ransomware attacks to the tune to $27 million to $50 million. Now, if you think that your company is better positioned than they are as far as cybersecurity, then please log off of the webinar and go have a wonderful day. If not, understand that it is, and one of the conversations I want to have, and I'm glad Bob's on this, is the government, the CUI, and this is where I wish everybody would listen to this statement. CUI, and one of the problems I had with the original CMMC is that we were looking at it, and still we're looking at it, program by program on the government side, right? So the contract looking down, and it is going to be here. I mean, come after the election 2024, late 2024 in December or January, I'm not sure what day, the rule will go live and start going into contracts. And if you're in one of those contracts, you better be ready. So I say anybody that's bidding and proposing on anything right now, as a bare minimum, you should be getting your SPURS scores from your suppliers and asking them to get them validated from the CMMC authority. Okay, get them validated, because that liability is going to be the primes. That's in the law and in the rule, right? The liability flows up, not down. And then the number two thing is, instead of looking at it program by program as the government is doing, understand that the adversary doesn't necessarily care if you've got CUI or not. If you're involved in the defense world, the DIB at all, they want to know your employees. They want to know who you're selling to, who your vendors are, your partners are. They're your CUI. That's the part that I just can't get people to understand. Your business is CUI. There's controlled unclassified information, but if you have PII or PHI running on your networks, right, that's CUI. And how many companies out there do we have? they're just like, oh, it doesn't apply to me because the prime didn't tell me. That's not going to help you when a ransomware attack comes and you weren't prepared. Your team didn't have any training. You didn't understand who to call. And I go back to the story that it was not a made up story. December 24th, 2019, I get a call from the White House. One of our primes, or one of our really, truly critical suppliers had a ransomware attack. And they were calling the Department of Treasury to say, where can we get the money for the ransomware? We don't pay that. And unless you have a slush fund, know that the adversary is coming after you. I mean, that's what the committee yesterday said point blank. I mean, it was all over the news this morning. And if you think that you're somebody that they're not paying attention to, you're dead wrong. You are dead wrong. So you were supposed to be compliant in 2017. We're now in 2024. And the comments on the rule they should not be submitted about what the NIST 171 Rev 2 is. That is not what this rule is about. This rule is about the implementation of CMMC and the auditing, how it's audited. Those are the only comments that should be going in. And right now I'm proud of the fact that we have done so much work. Stacy and crew have done so much work, and all of you in the community from when this first started, in the community input. I mean, that makes this program and why I call CMMC my baby, because we as a community created this. This wasn't Katie Arrington sitting all by herself. I mean, that was part of the deal. I opened the doors of the Pentagon because it was more important to get industry's input and how to actually put this to good use and would it be relevant and how and what and where, that they were co-creators of it because it was so critically important to business. So, and I think the reason why the public comments aren't as high as they are is because you all were so deeply involved in the creation of it. What more questions do you have aside from, and Bob mentioned it, when people say it costs so much? Well, what have you been doing since 2017? Have you not built it into your rates yet? Have you not understood that these things, when you do your billing rates, when you develop your program, you should include this as a cost? And one of the things that's going to hit everybody a little bit harder, I think, in January 2025, is that, yes, it is going to cost a little bit more because people are finally doing what they've been required by law to do. So it is happening. I'm so excited. I'm so proud of this community, though. I mean, you guys, if in a million years, if you had told me in January of 2019, when I walked into the Pentagon and they put me in that little tiny room inside the deputy's office, that there would be an entire market. I mean, I was on Instagram because I do Instagram. If you want to see, it's only to watch rainbows and grandchildren. I'm actually getting ads for CMMC on Instagram. To me, I love it when people on LinkedIn, they email you and they're like, are you interested in getting certified? It's like, do you know who I am? Right. I don't know if you get those, Bob. I get them all the time.
I do. Need legal help? Yeah. Let me offer a couple of quick comments, Katie. You said a couple of things that are really important, especially to people like me. I have to say, I am a lawyer. I can't really escape it. I occasionally try to offer useful security advice as well. We get all bogged down into the minutiae. I mean, there are various words, phrases, paragraphs, sections that are, in the rule where, I can spend an hour just turning around a phrase or two. Mm-hmm. But we need to kind of look at it from the top. And this is a threat-driven rule. That's what CMMC has been about from the beginning. The threat has gotten substantially worse since the time that Katie launched what became the CMMC effort in the Pentagon. And if you had any doubt about that, well, then you could go back and listen to the hearing just yesterday, which was at best, disturbing and dismaying, and arguably veered towards alarming. And what we heard yesterday was that the Chinese continue their extraordinary campaign of not just industrial espionage, exfiltration of valuable information, but wholesale theft of technology, whether it is CUI or other IP that you don't treat as CUI. And increasingly, the objectives of our adversaries, nation state and otherwise, are not just to compromise the confidentiality of your information, but to to compromise the integrity of information, to corrupt it potentially, to deny the availability of information and information systems. I mean, if you look at the whole of your enterprise as being ultimately data-driven, as most of them are, and you consider the incredible range of things that China and other adversaries, including criminal ransomware actors, might seek to do with your information, such as to prevent you from getting it and make you pay money, you're going to appreciate that the baseline requirements of 171 are a great place to start, but are really just a foundation for what more and better you need to do, and it will be a process of continuous evolution. Yes, yes, we all need to be attentive to compliance. And as a lawyer, you know, much of my job is you're compliant or you're not. But there's so much more to it than that. The national defense, as well as the enterprise interest of your partners, your investors, your employees, your lenders, all of these things demand a constant attention to enterprise security. And CMMC is part of that challenge, a necessary part because there's a regulation, but you know, an element, not the kind of end state of the security that you should seek.
Thanks, Bob, for that. Couple things, just getting into some nuts and bolts. One, to be a little lawyerly, somebody flagged, okay, your business personal information is not officially the definition of CUI, but I think Katie was more saying, look, you got to protect controlled and classified information. The same things you use to protect that, you should use to protect your business, because that's what's at risk. So please don't make Katie.
Well, you know, there's a distinction between should and must. You know, for complex organizations, they may have subsidiaries or sectors all over the country. They may have years and years of accumulated data. They may create IP that has nothing to do with government contracts. They will have PII and PHI. Now, the fact that that information may resemble a CUI category in this registry of the National Archives and Records Administration, it doesn't necessarily make everything that you've got across the enterprise or over the course of its history into CUI that must be legally protected. However, Katie is fundamentally right that you should protect it, because so much damage can be done to your enterprise by an adversary, whether it be China or a ransomware actor, by stealing that information and selling it on the dark web, or by locking that information within your servers so that you can't get to it, whether it's CUI or not. And I mean, I'm today helping a small company that has thousands of company staff people records that are the subject of an attempted ransomware attack. And are they CMMC compliant? I think they are. But I guess I would say it this way. Yes, there can be tighter limits on what is strictly necessary for compliance and what is strictly considered CUI. But the smart move, when you can afford it and to the extent that it is practicable from an operational standpoint, is to raise the bar higher everywhere, to do more and do better, and to improve it continuously.
So
question.
Oh, I was going to say, on top of that, so I am watching the questions and answers coming through, right? So who's going to determine who needs to have level 2 in your contract? That will be the prime. The prime is going to make the decision on who is going to be getting CUI in the flow down. So the government says this is CUI. Then the prime is to take that information and then determine who on their contract is going to be receiving that CUI information. And those are the entities they're going to look to get the CMMC level 2 certs, right? That those people on that side. So your prime is going to make the decision. So small businesses out there, do you like doing the hard work, the work that actually generates some real revenue? Well, then you're going to need CMMC too. If you stay along the lines that, no, I don't want to do any CUI, you're really limiting the amount of work that you're able to get into. So I wouldn't, for a business, right, the sky's the limit. And I wouldn't put this, as something like, I'm not doing it and I don't want to do it. Here's the other thing I wanted to add. So underneath the FASC, the Federal Acquisition and Security Council, there's a sub-council. This is the Unified Cyber Council. And people forget, and I actually was on the phone this morning with Mark Montgomery, Admiral Montgomery, who wrote the National Cyber Solarium Report. And in it, it stated very clearly the fourth pillar of that report, which, by the way, almost everything that they identified in that Solarium report, which was a bipartisan piece of work they have implemented. And Pillar 4 was a national cyber certification program. And that Unified Cyber Council has said, yeah, self-assessments don't work. The CMMC, we're going to watch how the DoD implements it. Then we're going to figure out how we as other agencies can piggyback off of that. So if you think you're safe in, I don't want to work with the DoD, I hearken you to find another agency that isn't going to have the same thing coming down the pipe, or the commercial sector. So this is a whole nother side to this show that, most of, the people on this call are worried about defense. The commercial sector that tangentially is a part of the DIB, right? They as well are coming down. They're changing the HIPAA laws. I mean, they're coming with new FINRA, new financial cyber requirements. So don't think that this is just the DoD. The globe has come aware of this. I mean, the EU has theirs, Australia has theirs, Taiwan, Singapore, you name it. We're kind of late to the game, in all honesty, because our process, and I will say this, and I love the government. You got to remember that I love my country. In case you can't tell, I love my country. I do. She is my everything. That if we don't start, I guess, finding a way to make it better. Ron Ross at NIST should get a Purple Heart. At the end of his tenure, Ron Ross deserves an award, the highest distinction possible. What we should look to do, though, as our adversaries are changing the TTPs on how they're coming at us, I think how our rule process is set up is too long. And by the time we actually get to implement it, it's changed, right? And I think that's one of the things. I work at a company called Exeger now. It's about supply chain risk management, cyber being a main focus there. And that's what I'm working on, is trying to get, how do we help industry, right, understand and ingest this? How can we make the government move faster when it comes to cyber, right? Because this, we put the NIST out, and that goes out for public comment. Bob, how long did the NIST 172 Rev B before it became 172 float around? 3 years?
Well, yeah, I mean, but between Rev 1 and Rev 2 was a couple of years, and between Rev 2 and the still pending Rev 3 is like 4 years. And now, NIST is talking about kind of, incremental improvements as, called for by events. I mean, in truth, having a, static set of security requirements makes sense for planning purposes. It's easier to work with, but kind of keeping your security controls indifferent to the changes in the threat landscape and into responses to those threats, it's a bit of a mismatch. I mean, ultimately, we need a kind of a more dynamic and threat-informed approach to security. Now, look, DoD is aware of this. I mean, DoD as an enterprise, as you know very well, Katie, has made a commitment to go to zero trust, which is quite a distance ahead of the 171 and its 110 controls. But it's going to take some years, but you got to have a foundation. Got to have a foundation. Yep. That's what 171 is.
Sorry, guys, I'm just going to move us along here because we got some territory we want to cover. I appreciate all your comments, but we have a lot of folks participating that are facing business challenges and are really trying to understand. Yeah, I understand I should be compliant, but when do I really need to? Just for starters, Katie, you made a couple of comments in your opening statements about when contracts are going to be awarded that require CMMC. If I could just ask you to double click on that, just unpack that a little bit, help understand the timeline, and then and then how this is going to appear in contracts, so people can kind of get a sense for what they got to do in their businesses over the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay, so first, the rule will get they'll adjudicate all the public comments, right? Then it goes back through and it goes through another interagency coordination. So most people don't realize that before you even saw it on the Federal Register, every agency in the federal government had a whack at it before they put it out. That happens. Then after they adjudicate all the comments, the PMO shop, Stacy Bosgenic's team, adjudicates the comments. It then goes back, circles back around, right? And then it goes into effect, which would be generally a year. It's a year time frame. So I think the 22nd or the 26th of December is when it popped out. So
day after Christmas. Yeah.
Day after Christmas. So what you will see And the government, it's somebody I read somewhere on the LinkedIn the other day about, I made promises about it. They will start with the most critical programs, right? So know that if you're looking at an ACAT 1 recompete, you can pretty much guarantee it's going to be in that, right? They're going to start with the most critical programs and the ones that are coming up for bid after that date, right? So the RFP gets issued. So I wouldn't be shocked if you see RFPs, which we've seen some, but getting let towards the end of the summer when we know the adjudication process has been completed, that it gets put into RFPs, RFQs, and RFIs. So the industry can start getting aware of it. Then after December 26th, 2024, it will start being in contracts across the board. Now, they won't, and I say that across the board, you'll see them out of all the services, but like I said, they'll start crawl, walk, run. So there's still a little bit of time, but not really, because you don't know which RFP it's going to come out on. So if you're not prepared, you're going to be a day late and $1 short. So that's all happening right now. They can, and I have been for the past year working with vendors, suppliers on how to get CMMC prepared. So there are a couple of things I want to tell everybody they should be doing. Number one, if you're a manufacturer in a state, reach out to your NIST MEP, Manufacturer Extension Partnership. They have grants, they have resources, they can help you. Secondarily, the APEX used to be the PTAX. They come out of the Office of Small Business. They can help you. They're there. They have been federally funded to help you get to good on this. The other thing that I want to say to everybody is you have to make, and I've been saying this since 2019, and that's how I actually got to talk to Prevail with Ranji and Sanjeev. They were at a meeting and I said, listen, you have to make fundamental decisions about your business. Are you going to do this organically? Or are you going to use COTS capability to bridge that gap so that you are compliant? Prevail is a great tool, end-to-end encryption. It solves a lot of problems for people. You have to look outside of the box and understand that most small businesses, you're probably going to need cybersecurity as a service, a provider, but you need to get the bids in. You need to understand the implementation of having that done and how much it will cost so you can start building your rates appropriately. And the government has learned, and I know everybody gets crazy about this because, hey, people forget I used to be in industry. I'm back in industry. But before I came to the Pentagon, I was with large defense contractors, service disabled, 8As, HUDs. I have a 100% P-win average. 100%. I've never lost an RFP I've written because I thought ahead to what the government was going to be needing. So if you're coming forward and you're saying, okay, I have my SPURS score and I had it validated, don't you think that the prime is going to look at you as a much better alternative, right? If you're competitive to be on a team, what are the differentiators that are going to make you the one that they choose? Making sure you have a SPURS score, that it's been audited, right, and validated. Building your rates appropriately. Lowest price technically acceptable has got us into this mess. And I pray that you all understand the only way to get out of this mess is that we are going to have to do the right things. As painful, and I know everybody out there, I see the comments, it's so expensive. It is, but it's not. When you actually sit down, I was at a machine shop 2 weeks ago, and they had all of the endpoints for the tooling machines. I said, just go to the NSA Cyber Collaboration Center, request to get into the pilot program for the DNS, have them walk you through putting that, and it's very low cost so that those endpoints are secure. The other thing that you can do that is very low cost that you can get, directly involved in are other programs out there. Like, how many companies are using DoD Safe today? Do you all know what DoD Safe is? And if not, you should. It's a way that the government can transmit CUI to you directly, not your comms. You need to Prevail for your communication, but from getting CUI drawings, DoD is a free program that you can use to get that information. So there are a lot of options out there. I need people to look beyond, we tend to be very bubble, and we have to look beyond. And yes, I know, I see the questions, the cost of the audit. I get it. I understand it. But we need it. And the government has said we need it, to the point where the rule has come out. They know what the cost. I mean, I worked the OIRA cost evaluation in the original CMMC. I know Stacy and the team, they worked hard on it on this last round. But folks, I mean, you're supposed to already have the 171 installed. That's OBE. That ship sailed a long time ago in 2017. So today you've got to worry about the cost of the audit. And I would find auditors that are willing to work on, instead of an upfront fee, a over the course of 12-month fee, right? If you're going to get an audit, right? Do the cost over the length of the contract. People need to get smart about how they're rolling their businesses out, especially on auditing side. The C3PAOs, I think, would be a really big benefit for them if they took it in bite-sized pizzas. I know in Prevail, it's billed monthly, right? You can't burden a small business with all of this in one lump sum payment. So think, all of the businesses that are going to be feeding off of the CMMC, that already are feeding off of the CMMC, are you really being a good business partner to your customer by the rates and how you bill them? I mean, I think that's one of the key things. If we could spread the cost of the CMMC audit over the course of the 3 years of the contract, it's not that much. And then the C3PAOs and the auditors have continual revenue. It's like, guys, think smart about your businesses. You can do this. And if you do it that way, the cost is digestible and you can put it into your rates and you won't go out of business.
Summarizing, I think a couple of big points that I thought I heard you say. The process takes about a year-ish. We're going to see, therefore, contracts that are awarded in probably early 2025, where CMMC is going to be a requirement, and the entire supply chain for a supplier is going to have been assessed for the contract to win the contract. And those RFPs are probably going to start happening this summer. And
later summer, yes.
And so, therefore, if you're part of that supply chain as a small, medium-sized businesses, you have to start to think about being prepared for that in order to be part of the contractor supply chain, in order to win that deal. And perhaps a competitive advantage is being a step ahead. Let me just throw a question for Bob for a second. The DoD has sort of teed up these things called joint surveillance assessments as maybe a way to kind of show that you're a step ahead of the game. Could you just discuss that just for a little bit?
Sure.
What is that, and how does that differ from a DIBCAC assessment? Just, a brief summary for those that really want to kind of demonstrate competitive advantage, early in the game here.
So, as Katie knows very well, we have the 70-19 and 70-20 parts of the DFARS, and the 70-19 essentially says that you have to do a self-assessment using an available DoD assessment methodology, and the highest score that you can get is 110. And when you look at that methodology, the most important cyber measures get 5 points, and then there's also some who get, I think, 3, and a few that get 1. Well, the DIBCAC, Defense Industrial Base Cyber Assurance Center, is part of a DCMA, and it has the authority under the 70-20 clause to conduct a high assessment, where it goes out to a contractor and essentially looks at their documentation, tests the self-assessment score, or does its own review and comes up with its own number. Well, what has been done for the last year or so with the joint surveillance assessment is that these government assessors at DIBCAC have essentially partnered with the private sector, namely the C3PAOs, Certified Third-Party Assessment Organizations, who are accredited by the Cyber AB, so that more assessments can be done using the same methodology and to get the same result. There are now about 50 C3PAOs that have been accredited by the Cyber AB. And there's at least about that number, perhaps a few more, of these joint surveillance assessments that have been done. I've counseled several companies, large and medium, on getting them done. Essentially, it's a way where the C3PAOs come in for a couple of days, could be as many as 5. They essentially look at the documentation you have to support your system security plan. They evaluate whether you have a solid basis to support the score that you claimed in SIPRs. And if you pass a joint surveillance assessment audit, then you get the benefit of that result put into the supplier performance review system, or SIPRs by DoD, and you get at least some extension of your JSV result into the period after the CMMC rule is effective. It is a good way for many companies not only to know where they stand, but also to demonstrate now or soon that they satisfy current requirements under the auspices of DIBCAC supervised review. And it's a credential that you not only have available to government contracting officers, but which you can share with prime contractors.
So you can get yourself prepared, then decide to get yourself assessed by a real live C3PAO and have that reviewed by DIBCAC, and then kind of, you know, get a gold star that you can then use in applying for contracts and stuff.
Yes, I mean, there's a bit of a waiting list because a lot of companies are seeing the advantage of doing this. And there's some reasons to think that actually the current JSV assessment is going to be a little bit easier than the CMMC Level 2 assessment when that requirement is effective. So quite a few companies who think they are ready, whether they are really small or a little bigger or way big. Microsoft had this done. Small, very small companies that you've had on your shows, Randy, they've had it done. You know, it's something really to look at. If you think you've got it done and you can get on the schedule for a C3PAO and with the DIBCAC oversight, well, you can get a leg up and have a lot of confidence that you're going to do well when the CMMC rule is effective.
Katie, I know you know these days you're doing a lot of work with primes and their supply base.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be really helpful for people to kind of hear from your vantage point. You know, how are the primes thinking about all this? What are the expectations that they're putting on their supply base? How is that manifesting itself in particular actions today? How do you see that evolving over the next 6 months? Maybe share a little bit about, you know, kind of how the primes are managing all this stuff.
So the primes, if you haven't, right, most have started in new contracts that they're letting, they're requiring to get the SPUR score from the subcontractor, okay? And they're requiring it of their subs, right? So they have their tier ones that they have a direct relationship with. They're also requiring then that their sub-tier providers, that they provide, they don't have to say the company name, but they have to say, we have a supplier X blank that has a SPUR score of what? So know that they know, because, and here's where the fun self-assessment comes in. And why I tell everybody, get your CPAR audited. You are now attesting to the federal government in a register that is owned by the federal government that if you are giving yourself a higher score, just because you fake it till you make it, I guess is the way some people would say it, you are 100% liable for a false claims action. And they have been moving them out quite rapidly. So I would say that if you're not, the primes that I've been dealing with, and I've been working with the majority of them, out of the love to get this moving, right? They want to help. So they're saying, how can we help you get better, right? And the problem is, instead of, you know, most of your subs talk to supply chain managers, right? They very rarely talk to the cyber folks, right? When was the last time any of you picked up the phone and called the supply chain manager and said, I need help getting to good because I don't want to be a bad partner to you? What would you suggest? I know a lot of them are offering, you know, doing laptops or pre-configured networks, VPNs, tokens to do the CUI work and helping them offset. They're letting, you know, some primes have their own cloud instantiations that they're having their small or medium size come into. But there's a litany of things, but they're very aware of it because ultimately they know they will not get awarded the work unless a good majority of their team has a CMMC certification. So they're asking for the spurs now. You should give it to them. You should bring in an auditor and just say, evaluate it. Just look at it. Tell me where I need my gaps to be filled. But they've taken it very seriously. There isn't a prime out there that thinks that this isn't happening. They want it to happen sooner than later, because when a ransomware, I don't know if any of you are paying attention to the SEC rule. Do you know about that? So the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission, so most of the primes are publicly held, right? So now by law, if they have a breach, they have to report it. And if that breach comes from their supply chain, it gets reported to the federal government. And if you guys are in that mix, understand your company is going to get a knock on the door from some people that are going to be very interested as to why you said you were compliant and you were doing the NIST 171, how this happened, because it's a national crisis. That SEC rule changed the game when you think about it. And I'm not picking favorites or talking, but how many large primes, the top 20, are privately held? And if you're on any of those teams, know that if you had a breach in your supply chain, the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission, now sees it. That's how big this is, folks. This is not, we're not kidding around in the government anymore. I mean, we're dead serious about this. And Tara Lemieux, my soul sister on cyber, puts out on LinkedIn pretty frequently about who's been hit and what's being sold on the dark web. If you guys saw all of your data that we are seeing out there for sale, you would be running to get audited today. If you actually understood what is being sold, your company information, your IP, information about your employees are being sold. Insider threat is a real thing. We have a tremendous influx of people coming into our country and validating all of these people to get jobs and get into the systems. Guys, they're here. You got to wake up. And if you have a problem, as I've said for years, if any of you have a problem with your C-suite taking seriously, I have offered repeatedly, and I've done, I would say hundreds, not thousands, but I have gone on my own time. I go in and I talk to the leadership and explain it to them. And the return on investment, once you become CMMC or 171 compliant to Rev 2, you will see a return on investment, because the things that you're just not paying attention to or you may not have access to, you'll start seeing it really quickly.
Katie, one more supply chain question for you, and then I got one or two for Bob on in a little bit different direction on some nuts and bolts details we get asked about all the time. But so we talked about primes and flow downs to their subs. What if, let's say, I'm one of those subs, maybe a medium-sized business? Talk about my responsibilities for my supply chain. You know, what do I need to do to ensure maybe a small, medium-sized business, but I've got suppliers to me. And how do I know that my suppliers are compliant? What do I need to do from that standpoint?
I would ask for the SPURS score, right? Why shouldn't you have that information, right? It's just like, do you have your business license and your insurance? I mean, you get that information. You should ask for a SPURS score. I personally wouldn't get in business with anybody with less than a 70, right? That scares me. That would be my flag. Another thing, you know, I'm with a company called Exeger that does supply chain illuminations, right? And just so you know, the government uses Exeger and others, right? And in that, and I can provide, and I'll send them to you, Randy, so you can put them out to everybody after this. There are actually RFPs that are out there now that their supply chain risk management criteria in sections L and M. They want a monitoring of how you're dealing with your supply chain. And cyber is the third most important thing they're asking for. So if you don't think that the government doesn't see your score right on the other side, they absolutely do. They're looking at open source information. They're looking at how your IP addresses have been hit, what's been going on. So you're getting a rating already. I would suggest get in there and get your own rating, validate it, so that when that happens, they can stop work with you due to convenience because you're non-compliant. So that's why I've been working with the large primes. That scrim part of this compounds the CMMC. It puts an extra, I would say, nail on the head. And there are so many rules. Most people aren't aware of all the DFAR rules about scrim And that those do include cyber as well. I mean, they are trying hard to foot stomp everybody to get to good. And the last thing I'm going to say, and I know time is tight, people say, well, it's not worth it and I'll leave the DoD. Then why are you here in the first place? I have to ask, if it's so hard, you joined an industry that is hard. It's not easy. It's never been easy. It's the most complex military on the planet. Did you think it was going to be a walk in the park? Did you think it was just going to be open hand money? Here we go. You are working on the most sensitive weapon systems. And more importantly, I say this every time I talk. We had 3 servicemen and 1 woman, 2 men and 1 woman die from a drone attack in the Middle East over the weekend because things didn't work like they were supposed to. Folks, people die. People die. And please do not tell me that what I do doesn't matter. Do you think if at the start of, and I'll use the Israeli conflict on October 7th, Iron Dome got hit with a DDoS attack, kids? Some of the most highly sensitive programs gets hit. Why do you think you're any different? And people are depending on you to do your job in compliance with the laws to protect other people, to protect those young men and women who are volunteering their life. So this is not, it's not, if you tell me it's going to cost so much money or it's too hard, you know what? Find a new world to live in. I'm about this mission of defending this democracy, our republic, and what she stands for around the world as a beacon on the hill of light. And if you're not there to win this game, because we are at war, go play someplace else. Because I have a daughter serving, I have a son-in-law serving, an ex-husband serving, a tremendous amount of family members serving. I worry about their life every day, and you should too, because this is the industry you're in. And that's the responsibility that you took when you got into this industry. So take it seriously, because people die. And those 3 people that died over the weekend, their families are getting those coffins coming home on a plane. Don't let that happen because you didn't get compliant. Sorry, I'll get off my, my neck.
No, it's a good message. We need to be reminded of what we're in this for in the first place.
We're in it to be real.
Right. Going deep into nuts and bolts on compliance, because I know people are concerned about how to be compliant, Bob. Do you have to get a perfect 110 score, or POAMs are allowed? There's some reference to 80% or something, but I think people would like to really understand what's the requirement.
You know, it depends kind of when. You know, first, you know, once there have to be 2 parts of the rule that go into effect. There's this Title 32 Code of Federal Regulations, which is the proposed rule that showed up on December 26th. That has a lot of stuff that's informative to contractors, but it's really operative or controlling upon DoD. It tells DoD how to administer this program. But the administration of the program reaches contractors through another part of the Code of Federal Regulations. That's in Title 48, which is where the contract clauses reside. So we're going to be seeing some proposed rules to update Title 48 provisions, such as perhaps 7012 and 7021, the CMMC clause. We're going to see that, you know, as early as March. And these things have to be synchronized. And the whole system goes into effect once we have final rules for both the Title 32 part, administering CMMC, and the Title 48 part that puts it into your contracts. Now, it's interesting to kind of look at the rollout schedule. Some people have this idea, Randy, you know, that it's going to take years and years and years and years. That's just not what it says. I mean, what it actually says is that once this rule is effective, even within the first 6 months, DoD has the discretion to put the mandatory cyber certification requirement into its contracts. And it goes on to say that within the next year, and just beginning 6 months after the effective date, it's going to include a certification assessment for all solicitations. It may defer, you know, applying it to options. But, you know, we are not so far away from when most solicitations and current contracts are going to find themselves with the required certification assessment and with that assessment being a condition of your getting a contract or an option extension. And what do you have to do? Do you have to get a perfect 110? Not quite, but you shouldn't expect a lot of latitude. You know, the way the rule is written now is that, yeah, you can have plans of action and milestones to close some gaps. They've got a 6-month window within which you got to close them, but you can only have those POAMs for some things. And generally, you cannot have them for the high value items that I mentioned on that DoD scoring methodology earlier. The POAMs are allowed only for a lesser set of things. There's a pretty long list in the rule of 110 controls that have to be met, you know, at the time and are not subject to POAM. And also, for you to get the benefit of any POAMs, you have to have, I think it's an 88 score. You know, I may have miscalculated it, but I think it has to be an 88 score. And that's not so easy to get, because the way this mechanism works is you start with a perfect 110, and then you look across the 110 controls and you apply the scoring values to which I alluded earlier. Well, if you have 110 in the best case, but then you fail 10 5-point items, well, suddenly, you know, you've got 50 removed and you're at what, you know, 60. So, you know, it's not easy. People should not assume that there's going to be a huge amount of latitude. There will be some in certain circumstances, but a strategy of playing for time by POAMs is not going to work once this rule is effective. And here's the key point. Under the present rule we have now, the actual fact as a legal matter is that you can be compliant with the rule by doing a self-assessment, reporting it to SIPRs, and having a lot of POAMs. There's no, you know, minimum requirement that you have to have. There's no limitation on the number of POAMs you have or what the POAMs apply to. That may affect your credibility to a prime or to a government purchasing officer, but there's nothing that says you absolutely have to close those or else. And there's nothing that says that certain POAMs are just not allowed. Well, this changes for sure when the CMMC rule comes into effect for the 77,000 companies who are expected to hold controlled unclassified information, and for the other 1,500 those would be at level 2, and for the other 1,500 who would be at level 3.
Yeah. So related question, we've gotten a few of these regarding foreign entities. I think the answer is obvious, but Bob, just to confirm, what are the, if you're a foreign entity and you're part of the defense industrial base supply chain, what are your obligations under CMMC?
Well, you know, there's some language in the narrative, the long narrative of the rule that makes this pretty clear. DoD basically concludes that the threats that are posed against the U.S. supply chain are also posed against our international partners. And DoD has not made a general concession that lesser standards or a lower process applies to foreign sources. The current expectation, and Katie's got lots of experience with this, the current expectation is if you're an international supplier in a DoD supply chain, you are expected to meet all the same requirements of 171. Now, I know that there are sovereignties where it's difficult to reconcile the national laws of this or that country with DoD's position. And as Katie knows better than me, there's been a lot of effort to work with different companies to come up with agreements between the countries so that DoD will feel satisfied. But companies, if they're in Mexico or Canada or Belgium or anywhere else that are selling into the DoD supply chain, they need to expect that the same requirements will apply to them. Getting the proper form of assessment done and respecting the sovereign laws of different countries is going to take some further work, but that work is going to get done, and the requirements are not going to be relaxed, in my estimation.
No, I think they only get more, they all get heightened. And to your point, Bob, what happens is most people don't realize inside the Department of Defense, there is a Department of International Relations. Every single country that we do business with, we have a special security agreement where we negotiate because of their laws versus our laws. When I was in the building, and I've traveled and I've spoken at NATO, I've spoken you name the countries, I've been around the world in the past 3 years. They love the CMMC to them, right? It translates because most of them have a NIST standard in their country as well. And they love the fact that there's a guideline. I mean, we took the cue. So let's give props where props are due. AIA started this. Jason, Tim, and that crew over at AIA started a cyber maturity model long before Katie came to the show. ExoStar had the questionnaire, right? All that was led off and kicked off by the UK, who had the GDPR back 10 years ago. So understand, like I said, we're late to the game on this. And a lot of people have asked a question. I just want to make this. The government has been releasing, I don't know if you have been watching, they are updating how they look at CUI, how they're cataloging it. They're very busy on that. One of the things that's going to benefit industry much better than they think, right? Because PMs have to sit back and think, okay, I've palmed for this program over the FIDEP, right? So does everybody know what the FIDEP is? 5 years. They've programmed it. So they're going to be very, I would say, selective, right? Because they understand the cost that's going to be, because there's cost realism studies that have been done that all of the acquisition community have. Somebody asked a question on the thing, you know, if we submit at I did this example, you know, contractor A submits at $150 an hour. They're not doing all 110 controls. The guy doing 225 an hour is doing all 110 controls. There's now cost realism that's at the acquisition offices that they'll know that your rate, there's no way you could be CMMC compliant or 171 compliant at that rate. And they won't award due to it, right? They'll say, that's too low. So know that they've got that. But I think that the way they mark CUI, because they're all getting retrained too, they're going to start, it is already starting. They're getting smarter about it, and what we need to mark and what we don't need to mark. But yet again, you know, this is a whole of government effort. This isn't just the DoD. Everybody's involved in this.
We only have a minute or so left. So I'm going to try and summarize a few things, and then we'll wrap it up. But I really appreciate both of your coming here and offering your perspectives. And in addition, from our perspective at Prevail, a kind of a practical kind of approach to this, if you're a small or medium-sized business, is to perhaps start working with a consultant who knows something about this in the space. Work on putting in place the key things that you know you're going to need to do no matter what, securing your communications and things like that, and then just go score yourself, and then and then you can submit that score to the supplier risk system, the SPUR score, and then as you improve those things, then you can work towards assessment. And a formal assessment, being ready with a C3PAO assessor. We're running out of time here, but Katie and Bob, thank you so much for joining us here. A number of you may have a lot of more detailed questions. After this, we actually have a couple of different breakout rooms that you can go to here. Some of you just want to talk about the basics. So if just stay on this Zoom session here. And some of you really want to get in the weeds about a lot more nuanced topics. And if you want to do that, there's a URL here, bit.ly.advanced-room for a different session where you can ask a lot more technical questions. Once again, to our good friends of Prevail, Katie and Bob, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you all for out there for participating and joining this session too.